So I get asked probably about every 1 or 2 weeks by somebody new, how do you row across an ocean? I've had the amazing honor of getting to join one of my best friends and some other really close guys to go out on adventures in different places around the world, really. And after having done one of these amazing experiences, like we did in rowing a rowboat from New York City to England, whether it's been a year since we've done it or 10 years since we've done it, you're still a target, if you will, for people who are on the hunt for information. And especially in the United States, relatively speaking, there aren't a lot of Americans who have done this in the past. And so when you get the question, gosh, how do I row across an ocean? I mean, where do you begin? You know, it took us, on the first time we did it, about 1.5 years to actually put one of these expeditions together, which would ultimately prove successful and get us into the Guinness Record books. So when somebody comes to me and they ask, you know, how do I row across an ocean? What we really have to do then is just say, okay, hold on, let's break this down into a few parts. So there are really 3 primary components of rowing an ocean. There is the mental and psychological component, there's the physical component, and then the sponsorship and administrative side of things. Sponsorship and administrative we won't really touch on here at this point today, but I think especially with the physical therapy background, we can touch on the first 2 fairly well. So we can really just summarize, I think, quite succinctly the mental preparation needed. And what I'll usually tell people is that in order to survive, and really if not thrive, in rowing across the Atlantic Ocean or any ocean, mentally, you have to have at some point suffered. And what I mean by suffered is been out doing some sort of athletic or physical endeavor for long enough where you didn't really have a choice when you got tired as to whether you were going to stop or not. Because when you're out there in the middle of the ocean, I mean, the only thing to do is row, eat, or sleep. And then when you've exhausted the eating and the sleeping side of things, you got to keep rowing. And the only place to row is home or wherever your destination is. And along the way, you're just going to be exhausted mentally, physically, emotionally, but there's only one thing left to do, and that's row. And so, for example, when we are preparing for our expeditions, those are the exact scenarios that we are putting ourselves in, where we're out away from home and family and connectivity and technology long enough where we start to feel like we're yearning and longing for it. Just so we can start to get a taste, get a feel for what it would really be like in real life once we're actually underway and we don't have any choice but to keep rowing. And so when we're actually selecting the teammates to come along with us, one of the first things that we ask them is, well, what have you done in the past? Because if we're going to be in the middle of nowhere, and if we're going to have to trust these people sometimes with our lives, we need to know that they have understood truly what it's like to have to dig down deep and suffer for a little bit. On the physical side of things, that is where, at least with rowing an ocean or going on an incredibly long hike, a lot of the preparation just comes from actually physically doing it. And anytime you're going to do something of an extended, duration, something that's going to last a really long time, it helps to have actually done whatever that sport it is that you're about to embark with for a while itself. So take, for example, rowing. Before all of us took to the ocean our first time, we had been rowing already for a number of years. And so it's like our bodies were already pre-adapted. Our ligaments and our joints and our bones and our muscles knew what it was like, knew the feel, knew the stress and the daily rigor of what rowing was all about. And so that really gave us a leg up on our competition. when we were out there. And I think when we elongated from the journey from doing maybe a 4-day or 10-day training row to what would ultimately be a 70-day expedition, having that time, having that preparation of just letting our bodies know what to encounter, what to expect with that same day in, day out pulling of the oar was just exceedingly helpful. Now, because rowing in particular is a fairly just sort of straightforward, straight backward type of sport on the sliding seat, that would lead you to believe that, well, all you need to do for training and preparation is do lots of that straightforward, straight backward motion. But when you're actually on the ocean, the boat is moving with waves, and it's this 3-dimensional pitching and yawing and spinning of this boat, and you are just sitting right on top of this thing and having to apply pressure on the oar no matter what position the boat is in, no matter what position you are in. And so another aspect of the physical preparation that we will always encourage people to do is, aside from just getting out and rowing and keep rowing, but actually getting into doing some other sort of cross training that utilizes those other planes of motion. So you're not just running in a straight line. You are trail running, which encounters all the up, down, and the rolling hills. You're doing lots of lifting and pushing and pulling. So quite simply, finding something heavy and lifting it up and carrying it for a certain amount of time, and somewhere along the way, switching hands. Maybe you go to a place where you find something you can throw, like go to a beach. You get heavy rocks or logs that you can try and lift or push or pull and actually vault them as far as you can go. And much the same, you do this in a way that allows your body to just gradually realize this demand that's being placed on it, and then over time your body actually adapts to these 3-dimensional forces. So that way, let's say we're a month and a half out to sea. We've been rowing in fairly straightforward, I wouldn't say calm, and certainly not flat, but just sort of rolling, wavy waters. And then there's a big storm, let's say a few hundred miles south of you. Well, over the next couple days, the waters are going to churn up. They're going to get really messy, and the waves aren't going to be as smooth and consistent as they otherwise would be. So the boat now starts pitching and yawing, and you're tired, you're fatigued, and you need to be able to get through that unscathed, with little injury, and be able to sit on the oars for 12 hours out of your 24-hour day, and then be able to wake up the very next shift and keep going. So, and you really can't do that, to summarize, without having a lot of time rowing and getting your body used to that itself, and then supplementing that with this other sort of more 3-dimensional training that involves all your muscle groups. All right, so you may be asking, what exactly would a training regimen look like? Well, of course, it depends on what you have available to you. At the very least, I would hope that you either have a rowing machine that you have access to as often as possible, or some sort of a rowing boat with access to enough water and enough time where you could be in and on the water as much as possible. And out of 7 days out of your week, I would expect that you're going to be spending 4 to 6 days of that actually rowing. And when you're on a machine, for example, you don't necessarily need to increase your resistance and make it really, really heavy. Because initially, it's all about just gently reminding your body, hey, we're going to be doing a lot of this. And it's more about repetition early on than it is about seeing how strong you feel like you can make yourself. So let's take the concept to ergometer, and as far as resistance goes, you have the selection, the setting that goes from 0 all the way up to 10. So with some variability that's automatically mixed in with that machine, you may find that it's a little different from machine to machine, but generally, if you are training anywhere from a number 2 to a number 5, that should be adequate for you to spend enough time and add up enough miles rowing. Initially, just about half hour to 40 minutes each session, but gradually building it up where you're going for somewhere around an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half before you take a break and then are getting back on. There's a big difference between rowing on a machine and actually rowing in a boat, though. When you're on the machine, there's a lot more stress placed on your low back, which from the physical therapist standpoint can lead to lots of overuse and potentially lead to injury that you'd like to avoid here in a training like this. And so that's the reason why you want to be cautious with your use of the rowing machine and really not take it beyond that hour and a half time without taking at least some sort of break of at least 1 to 2 minutes where you can stand up, walk around, get a quick stretch, hydrate before sitting back down and continuing on. Once you get yourself relatively comfortable with rowing on the machine and your sit bones down under your bottom are getting more comfortable, you don't have to sit there and stare at the monitor. Put on a movie right in front of you and enjoy it. As a matter of fact, one movie that we went back to quite often was Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. So always a treat to sit down for that. It would just make the time fly by. So in addition to rowing as much as you can over those 4 to 6 days and gradually increasing your volume or your mileage, the weightlifting and three-dimensional, really heavy things carrying that I was talking about earlier, that is something where what I'd recommend is not necessarily thinking about how many sets and reps that you're actually doing of something. Initially, sure, if you'd like a little bit of framework, start out with a weight that you can confidently manage of doing 3 sets of 15 to 20 repetitions of this, where you're not completely put out by the time you're done, but you're happy to be done with those repetitions. And you can set yourself up stations where in one station you're incorporating some core and abdominal work, like mountain climbers, where you're in a push-up position and you're alternating, drawing your knees up toward your elbows. You can get into some lunging or some squatting while you're hanging on to something heavy, like a kettlebell or a dumbbell, or if you don't have anything like that, finding something heavy in your garage, like a sack of potting soil or certain tools, or maybe a 10-pound hammer, something like that. You can really get creative, and in the end, that's what ends up, I think, actually bringing more of a sense of joy and accomplishment to your workouts. And so after you have established a circuit and a number of activities where you're doing 3 sets of 15 to 20 repetitions, over time, as you feel yourself getting stronger, again, it ends up becoming more about the amount of time that you're actually doing this work, more so than the number of repetitions. So after a couple months of preparation, doing your initial sort of sets and reps, you can set a timer for say 45 minutes or an hour, gradually building yourself up in these 15-minute increments where you essentially what you're doing is you're staying busy with your weighted activities. And as you get used to and get accustomed to different types of lifting, pushing, pulling, throwing, crawling, you can also incorporate what my friends and I call the run carry, where you find something that is not terribly heavy, but just heavy enough where, let's say you have plotted out on a map a course of anywhere from 1 mile to 3 miles. And whether you're running by yourself or running with a buddy, you carry something that is anywhere from 5 pounds to 10 to 15 pounds, and it can't touch the ground for the duration of the run. And you'll find that along the way, you've tried to find all the different positions you could put it in, whether it's up on your shoulder or up on the other shoulder or under either arm. Maybe you're bear hugging this item, and then you can set, if you're doing this with a buddy, you can set some incremental time or a distance where at a certain point you switch. So that way you're actually, again, varying the load and the challenge for your body. And you can really begin, especially as you tire, to endure. And it's that concept and that ability to endure that's really going to allow you to succeed most when you're out in the middle of the ocean It's wet, you're cold, you're tired, you're irritable, maybe a little bit hungry, and the wind is blowing, and it's dark, and something got wet that you didn't want to get wet, and your feet are cold. But you are still going to keep rowing because that's the only thing left to do. You can be grumpy about it here and there, but otherwise, you're going to eventually learn to put a smile on your face when you do it, because you'll realize that every once in a while, you'll think into the future, and you're going to imagine sitting in a pub with your buddies or sitting around the dining room table with your family, recounting the experiences. And some of them are going to be joyous, like the first time you saw a pod of dolphins, or seabirds out in the middle of nowhere, thinking, how in the heck could they have gotten out this far? And you're also going to recount those times when you were just miserable, but you're going to look back on them with a certain fondness because you were prepared for it and you learned how to endure. And that experience is what ended up making you more of the person, gave you more of your toughness than you ever could have had before doing an adventure like this. So the more you can be ready for that by turning your training into not just sort of something you do by going to the gym, but something with purpose, with the thought in mind that this is going to be what really prepares you for life's challenges, I think that is where you actually end up getting the perfect blend of the physical preparation and the mental preparation to succeed with this. You know what the one thing is that I don't get asked very often is, were you scared? Or were you ever worried that something would badly go wrong? And I guess I don't know why that surprises me. In the lead up to all of our other expeditions, it was usually the moms, and every once in a while we'd get a dad who would look at us with a bit of concern and say, "You guys concerned you're never going to come home?" And, you know, there's a certain amount of bravado that I think you have to have in order to take on an endeavor just like this. And when I think about that, I realize, oh, you know, this is probably why I don't get asked this type of thing. But also, too, at the same time, I remember looking to others for advice before we first set out on our first expedition. And not to put myself in this light, but I would look at these people who had already done this, and I would almost put those other adventurers up on this sort of legendary status pedestal where they don't have fear. They're never afraid. They persevere. They're strong. And it's not until you actually go through it that you realize what a bunch of bullshit that is, and that we're all human. There is a natural fear that I had leading up to this sort of journey that had a lot to do with water and everything to do with the fact that I'm a terrible swimmer. Like, just terrible. I'll tread water for maybe 15, 20 minutes and be really happy to be done. But if you ask me to get from point A to point B, I will get there last, and at some point I may wonder if I'm going to make it. And what am I doing getting on a rowboat going more than 3,000 miles across the open ocean? Hopefully staying above water and in the boat. And so it was really trying to balance the fact that I'm a terrible swimmer, the fact that I am in this boat with one or two other people that I've never been in any dire situations with, and wondering, will I be able to trust them? And what's it going to be like to be in a storm? So I was terrified, absolutely terrified. And I don't think any of that would change if I were to go out to sea again tomorrow, because I'm still a terrible swimmer. I likely have, again, one or two people on the boat that I haven't spent a ton of time with. And the sea can be so different, even in the same place from day to day and storm to storm, that it's always going to be an unknown. And and I will gladly give props to the budding adventurers and people who are getting ready to head out to sea, for being tough and have the best answers for, well, aren't you afraid? But deep down inside, I really do wonder, is that just a bunch of bullshit because you got to look good for the camera? Or can I trust them for really being genuine? I think the people who I'm going to be helping or providing information for or providing advice going across the ocean really should have an understanding as to what their fears are. And that kind of goes back to, why are they doing it in the first place? Because let's say a buddy of yours says, hey, I have a great idea. Let's row across an ocean. And if your gut instinct is to say, yes, I'm going to leave my job, I'm going to take my savings, and I'm going to go for broke, and I'm going to row an ocean, I would actually be a little bit concerned, because it's a massive undertaking that has many components and requires a shit ton of preparation. And if you can just flippantly say, well, yeah, I'm going to do this, then I would wonder if you're going to be the best teammate. But if you've actually taken some time to think and really find what it truly is about this that drives you to want to row an ocean, then I think you're on the right track. I know you're on the right track, actually. That's the way that we pick our other teammates that are going to come with us. So while my fears haven't changed, and those are my fears, and everybody has their own fears that they have to come to terms with when they're getting ready to do some sort of a journey like this. And you may end up realizing some of those fears while you're underway. And I'd say the one piece of advice that I would give to you, in not just in getting ready for your journey, but the journey and the adventure itself, is a piece of advice that was given to me way back before our first row across an ocean. And it was a piece of advice that I was given at the end of what was an extremely long day, a very stressful day, lots of work, not only on the boat, but also with fundraising and trying to put every little piece together to make sure we could actually get to the ocean in the first place. The last thing we wanted to do was hear somebody else's advice, because nobody is ever short of advice. But every once in a while you find the gems, and this one gentleman who was a very well-known and respected sailor in and around Seattle, he heard about our story, he'd heard about us, and the one piece of advice that he said was, it's all about how you respond to your first big fuck up. And at the time, I thought, this sounds important. And I think this guy really knows what he's talking about. And then it wasn't until fast forward, we were a few weeks in on our first journey. We had left New York. We were already 1,000+ miles out to sea. And one of our teammates informs us that after counting up the amount of food that we had on board and the rate that we were going through it, he had figured out that we didn't bring enough food. And that is when that piece of advice first came to light. We were going to be in the middle of the ocean without enough food, with no way to go home. And if we asked for help on this particular journey, we would have been disqualified from the race that we would ultimately win. But at that point, all of the negatives were stacked against us. And it was at that point that we had to face ourselves, face each other, face our fears, and really try and figure out, how do we succeed from here? And it's only when you come like truly face to face with the challenge and with your fears in life do you really get the opportunity to be tested in a way that's going to allow for growth. That's going to let you succeed, fail, or fail miserably. And if it's in a life or death situation, I wish you success. If it's part of your preparation, I wish you failure or miserable failure. So that way you can really learn the lessons necessary to when it really comes time for the real life situation, that you have been through the muck and you have the opportunity to really settle in and realize, what are the tools that I have in front of me? What do I need to succeed and thrive in this situation, and how can I put them to work? And through there, and through those experiences, I'm not going to say you're going to conquer your fears, but I will say that you're going to be in a lot more control over them.